so easy for you that I undermine its style and its ideas. So it is demanding of the reader a particular type of effort or a particular level of engagement, which suggests that translation is not undertaken just to reinforce values, nor to just teach them kind of knowledge as such. Interestingly as well, when this book was translated into Arabic, the author, not the translator, but the author, wrote a special introduction for the Arab reader. And that special introduction, again, is not simply reinforcing the values of the target culture, even though the author is very sympathetic and actually he is very critical of America and so on and so forth. But he's not just doing that. This introduction, which is written very specifically for the Arab reader, is telling the Arab reader it's not all America's fault. You have to look at yourself as well and see that you are also making certain mistakes. It says, despite, this is the author's introduction, despite the enormous political, cultural, and economic influence exercised by the United States across the Arab world, many Arabs, perhaps most, still fail to understand why the United States behaves in this way in the region and do not have sufficient knowledge of American politics, history, and culture. Instead, simplistic explanations and blatant forms of misunderstanding and conspiracy theories enjoy wide circulation. So this is an introduction, again, that the text is left as it is practically, but through the introductions both by the translator and the author, the reader is being told this is not just to entertain you, this is not just to reinforce your values, you have to make an intellectual effort, and you also have to realize that all those conspiracy theories and exaggerating certain things about America and so on is not the right way to go. So they're criticizing the reader openly, essentially. You have some footnotes by the translator, but unlike other footnotes I'll show you shortly, these are ones that, which is very much in line with the kind of introduction I showed you by the translator. These are footnotes that are added for clarification to make sure that the reader is able to understand the complex concepts and arguments of the book. So, to summarize, and you see the difference in a minute with other things, you have a minor change in the title, nothing much. There's no change in the back cover, so those spaces are not really used for intervention. Where there is more engagement with the whole process is in the introduction by the translator and the author. The footnotes don't do anything other than encourage the reader to engage more intellectually with the text, and the footnotes and the introduction both demand from the reader a certain level of engagement. This is where it gets interesting, because in this case you have a source text which is very, very much, not only very much at odds with the values of the target culture. This is a source text that particularly targets the Arab world and demonizes it, and the Muslim world. Probably most people will have heard, I hope, of Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations and the remaking of World Order. But for those who don't know it, this is a book that is based on an article that came out in 1993 in the Foreign Affairs magazine. This is a very influential magazine that is read by the top politicians in the States. Huntington was a political scientist based in Harvard. He died a couple of years ago. And the article itself became very important, very influential, and then he wrote a full book where he elaborated his argument further. And that book is said to have been the Bible of the Bush administration and informed American foreign policy, and including American foreign policy in the region, the attack on Iraq and so on. This book posits that the world is made up of 8 civilizations, and that whereas in the old days during the Cold War, countries like the United States, Russia, and so on, either they were engaged in conflict, or there was war, or the threat of war because of different ideologies, communism versus capitalism, for example. All the new conflicts and wars in the future are going to be civilizational clashes, meaning they are going to be driven by differences differences between civilizations, and these differences are not negotiable, because unlike ideologies, you could be Russian, but you could be a capitalist, or be even capitalism. Civilizations are what they are. They're not negotiable. And he actually says quite explicitly, you could be an Estonian and could be capitalist, but if you're a Muslim, you're a Muslim. If you're an Arab, you're an Arab. If you're Chinese, you're Chinese. You're always going to be that way, because that's what civilization you belong to. And he reserves a lot of value in the book for the Islamic civilization in particular, and actually says in different places that Muslims are by nature prone to violence, among other things. So you can see how a book like this is not, you can't just translate it as it is and into Arabic without some kind of intervention. This is a book that targets your target reader very specifically, and is not at all complementary towards your target culture. At the same time, this is not the development model, this is not the civilizing mission. You still translate things that are very much at odds with your values, because you need to know. You need to know what is going on in the world. That's what drives these translation projects. This book was translated twice in the space of 2 years, once in Egypt and once in Libya. The Egyptian translation is not as interesting as the second one, so I'll show you both. First of all, covers. Again, this is a bestseller. It came out in many different editions with many different front covers, but these two should give you a flavor of what the covers do in the original book. So, for example, on this side over there, the clash of civilizations and the remaking of world order, although Huntington talks about 8 different civilizations, the African, the Chinese, so on and so forth, actually what it boils down to in the end is you have the green and the crescent, which are the symbol of Islam, and you have the American flag. So what it boils down to in the end is that it's a fight between Islam and America as the champion of Western civilization, as it were. Similarly, on the other side, you have the cross, the Marxist star in red in the middle, and you have the crescent, which is Islam, and then at the very bottom you have this is the symbol of Chinese culture, the yin yang. And you have a quote from Kissinger, evoking the Cold War. Kissinger was one of the masterminds of the Cold War. So the whole, even the cover itself, is suggesting that these are completely separate things and are in conflict with each other. Christianity, Islam, Chinese culture in particular, and then evoking the Cold War as a backdrop for this. The first translation, which was done in 1998 in Egypt, goes for a very abstract cover that is none of the covers of the English editions. It has a 20-page introduction by someone who is not the translator, a big intellectual figure. And this is part of the introduction, says, which is repeated on the back cover. So part of that introduction is used as the back cover. For what Huntington manufactures at the end of the day or presents is a new map for managing crises engendered by real factors of conflict. He lays out an agenda in which he repositions actual economic and political priorities. This serves to actively mislead people in various parts of the world and to divert attention away from what is happening around us, such that the various parties could be manipulated effectively in order to serve the same old interests. These are not the interests of the masses, whether in the East or the West. The book in its entirety is an insistent reminder of our duty to hold on to hostilities among human beings so that the political elite can devote themselves to running their affairs and managing the ruptured world. His perspective on the civilizational order is no more than a thin cover for an ancient concept or practice, namely divide and rule. So you can see both the introduction and what was selected out of the introduction as what you see on the back cover when you're picking up the book to read it are very dismissive of the book. Now that is unusual. When you pick up a book in the bookshop, usually the back cover tries to sell it to you, to tell you this is a really good book, this is an important book, this is an interesting thing to read. This one doesn't. This one tells you this is essentially a load of rubbish. Read it by all means, but don't believe it. Don't take it seriously. Okay, so summary, 20-page introduction, directly contesting. The whole point of the introduction is to contest the argument in the main book. There are footnotes, but they are like the one in the previous one. They just explain cultural and historical references, and you have the damning cover, which essentially, rather than selling the book to you, is telling you, if you read it, don't take it seriously. The second one is the more interesting one, and that's the one that was done in Libya. And you have two translators in this case, and you have a reproduction of one of the covers of the many editions of the original, again with the three, the cross, the Chinese thing, and the crescent. But you have two things. You have two introductions. One is a short 4-page introduction by the two translators, which is essentially trying to justify why they translated this book in spite of being such a horrible book. And then you have an extensive 49-page introduction, another introduction, by one of the translators, where the argument is taken apart, every bit of the argument is taken apart. This is a flavor of what's in the 4-page introduction. Given what we have noted of the chaotic structure and incoherence of the text, and the flaws in the methodology adopted by the author, and in an effort to identify the underlying agenda of the Clash of Civilization thesis, it was necessary to deconstruct the mechanisms and assumptions of the Clash of Civilizations discourse. Dr. Malik Qabaid Abu Shahwiya, who is one of the two translators, has therefore prepared a study of the political and intellectual assumptions of the Clash of Civilizations discourse and the mechanisms it relies on in outlining its conceptual apparatus, persuading others, and acquiring supporters. This study is entitled An Initial Contribution, and so on. So this is quite an extensive, this is quite, again, a dismissive introduction. More interestingly, and then you get the 49-page introduction. By the time you get to the book itself, you know, they've already taken it apart. The guy doesn't stand a chance. But even then, because not everybody reads introductions, so that's not enough. Just in case you don't read the introduction, what you then have throughout the book is an incredibly large number of footnotes on almost every page. There is a footnote written by the translators which contests some point made in the main text. So that the effect that you get all the time is that you are reading two people at the same time. You're reading Huntington and you're reading the translators commenting on Huntington and telling you, this is not a coherent point because X, Y, Z. So it's a very, very interesting experience. Here is an example of that. At one point, Huntington says the cultural difference between Mexico and the United States is far less than that between Turkey and Europe. The accommodation between Anglo-American North America and Spanish India and Mexico should be considerably easier than that between Christian Europe and Muslim Turkey. So he's saying, although Mexico and so on belongs to a different civilization from the so-called West, he's invented this category called West, these two can be accommodated. We can live with the Mexicans because they're Christians like us. But the Muslims, Turkey is a different civilization. And this is the footnote again, back translation.